Double bind.
Double bind.
Double bind.
Double bind.
Double bind.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Double Blind. I'm your host, Springle, aka Neil. Did I say double blind? Yeah, it goes to show you how things get f***ed up here. Double Bind, which is the blackest podcast out there, because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know how it feels. So welcome. I got two of my special guests here. Of course, all my guests are always friends, and these are things that are personal to us. I have Twaz online from New York City and my boy Boogs from Toronto. So say hello, everybody.
Hey, y'all.
Greetings from Twaz.
Greetings, my folks. So I know I asked you guys to come join me on this podcast today. I wanted to talk about a situation that I just read about. You guys are familiar with the Flint, Michigan water issue that they're having, right?
Yes.
So the city has awarded them a $600 million settlement. So I did the numbers. It's about 100,000 people in Flint. So when you break that money down, it's about $6,000 per person. Do you guys think that is worthy of these people suffering in all these years that they've been suffering without clean water? Or do you think they could have taken that money and actually, instead of paying out personally to these individuals, do you think they should actually take that money and invest in actually fixing the infrastructure? What do you guys think?
Well, actually, that was going to be one of my first questions. Have they actually remedied the issue? Is it still an ongoing issue, or are they just offering some form of compensation to appease those who have been inflicted, by absorbing the chemicals within that water?
That's a good question. They didn't give too many details in terms of the settlement, like who they actually will be paying out to.
Because if I'm not mistaken, this has been going on for
7 years, almost 7 years. Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah.
And it disproportionately affected black
Yeah,
people.
because Flint is a predominantly black city, if I'm not mistaken. Like, let me make sure I got my Google numbers right. I think that I don't think that money's enough.
So I guess it's like $1,000. I guess they broke it down to
6,000 person.
$1,000. Yeah, so $1,000 per year.
Basically, which is nothing.
Is the value of a black life?
Yeah, which is nothing. Which is absolutely nothing. I'm sure they kind of, maybe in some ways they might have come down or come up with that number because they probably calculated people's water bills maybe for like a year. But yeah, in my head it should be a little bit more. In fact, a lot more than that. I don't think 6,000 is enough. Or I think it should be a combination of a personal payouts as well as infrastructural renovation. Yeah.
Yeah, I also don't think you can compensate for something as abhorrent as this without actually, before the issue is actually resolved.
Right. It's
kind of counterproductive.
Right.
Like, hey, y'all, the issue is not resolved, but here, take this in the meantime.
Twice.
Is that the starting number? Because that number seems like really low. Who's doing their who's their legal team? Who's representing them? It seems to me more of a problem of leadership. Like who's the leadership in Flint, and why are these people getting these crumbs? I guess the second most important question is, how many bottles of water can you buy for $6,000? Because it's like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, if it's not fixing the problem, you know what I mean? It's like putting a Band-Aid
and not just not fix the problem, but these people are suffering from medical issues affiliated with unclean water. You know what I mean? Yeah, some people are coming up with cancer and sores and things like that. Like, those are not things that you can really truly compensate people for. To some degree you can, but depending on the medical bills. But yeah, I think that 600 million, that's not enough.
Wait, you said 600 million or 600,000? 600,000, right?
No, 600 million.
Oh, million. Oh.
Did I say 1,000 earlier?
No, you said 600 million. You said 600 million. But it's just like the thing that's happening in Flint, it's happening all across America. These, towns, these factory towns, which are no longer thriving, are now in economic turmoil. So this is a issue that's even bigger than just the actual dirty water. I'm not really aware of all their internal politics, but just from a macro view, it just seems like faulty leadership. And it's like what's happening to Flint is happening all across America. These towns in need of infrastructure revitalization, economic, infusion or projects. It's happening all over, and I don't think Flint is going to be the last Flint that happens in the next the next coming years.
Well, they did say that there are other places similar to Flint, excuse me. But you know how I feel about certain groups. I feel like this shit seems to almost always happen in minority, if not predominantly Black communities. Do any one of you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, and there are reasons behind that, right? It's, to Twaz's point, leadership. I mean, we could even look at it from a bigger perspective of underfunding the Black and brown communities. There are just a number of factors as to why this disproportionately affects Black and brown people. I mean, we could be here all day, but I think for me, it's like, how do we now, once we recognize this, once we have this rude awakening, if you will, how do we then mobilize and move forward and crush those barriers that are always seem to be ever present and harming us, right? Like, how do we overcome that?
Now I'm gonna just stop you for 1 second. I don't agree. Like, I don't have all the numbers on it, but I don't believe it just affects African American communities, and I just think it's dangerous for us to paint it in that light. I think it happens to poor people all across the country, of all colors, of all shapes and sizes, and this is a poor issue.
But you don't think it happens? It predominantly happens. It predominates primarily our communities.
Media, propagates it so because it's better. It makes better television. It makes better. It makes better sound bites. It makes better content. But at the same time, I think we limit these issues solely to African American communities, or just kind of paint it that it's only happening in African communities. I think we alienate ourselves from the disparaged, from the overlooked poor whites. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be some poster boy for poor whites. But I think part of why we have the current president is because a lot of the poor whites have gotten overlooked in a lot of the capitalist, exploitation takeovers that's been going on. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that this doesn't affect Black and brown people. I think it's going to be important moving forward to all the poor people that were affected by this. I was watching a movie on.
You're speaking on classism, right?
No? I watched a movie with Mark Ruffalo, and he was talking about I think it was DuPont, some big chemical company that was basically pumping Teflon into this town. They're probably this chemical company that was making the Teflon that we use for our pots and pans. They guys were responsible for that. They were pumping the Teflon in the water supply because they couldn't get rid of it. It was causing cancer.
Right. I like that you push back on me. I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I think that the reason, just to touch on a few points that you made, the president that you have now is not really solely because the poor white people felt left out. It's because they're racist. Okay. Second point, the environment and pumping, gases that are harming them into the air and then being upset about it. There are a few cases, particularly what I've read about West Virginia and the coal mining and people in those surrounding areas, getting cancer, and they're predominantly white. It's a red state. So they're getting cancer and they're dying. And I know there was this woman running for Congress. She actually lost because she wanted to, pass bills that would protect civilians that are living in the area. However, in the same breath, though, there are workers in that area that want to bring back coal, right? And that is killing them. The very same emissions and gas that is killing and harming them, they want it back because to them it turns into...
They want it back. And so, in other words, that concession is truly under their own, their demise is on their own concession, if you really think about it. It's not so much they're being victimized by a larger community. They I hate using that word victim because again, Twaz, you and I have talked about that word. But yeah, so the difference is there where coal is an industry that provided them with a income and help to build their communities. It's a little different when coal is not a necessity. Clean water is a necessity. So there are some differences and some nuances comparing
too,
a group.
You know what I mean? So back to my point. You know what I mean? Back to my point. These people are going to what they know and the jobs that they know, and those jobs are the coal jobs. That's the jobs they built their American quote unquote dream upon for generations. You know, so what I'm saying is this lack of options, this lack of opportunities, this lack of healthy options and resources to build the community, to build the family legacy or American dream, which was promised, quote unquote. These are being left, taken away from communities all across the country based off of, class and education and all in region. So I think I hear what you're saying for the movement, but I'm just saying like we need to go. We can't just. I mean, it's great to acknowledge all people of color. So I'm just saying, I just think from a political perspective, we sometimes burden ourselves or limit ourselves, especially as part of numbers and support, because we're not using big tent kind of politics and putting other people under this umbrella.
Has Big Tent politics actually ever really helped us as a group in itself? One of the things I noticed with legislation and just policies and certain things that are put in place, like they'll reword everything to people of color or minority.
I just feel like don't get me wrong, I'm a liberal Democrat, but I really just feel like, due to CNN, due to 24-hour news cycle, due to a lot of due to social media, we sometimes, or a lot of times, more and more often get splintered in these identity politics segment groups, you know what I mean? Which I don't think on a big level really push us forward politically. Putting up all these little identity groups. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. Like, bro, we all want jobs. We all want jobs and to make a good living. Gay, straight,
I
black,
hear
white,
what you're saying, and I do feel a part of that when I'm watching it, but I usually feel that part towards the end when I'm processing what I've just absorbed. And then I say, hey, wait a minute. Why is there even such a thing of identity politics? Oh, it's because these voices have not been heard for so long. Yes, we all want jobs, but these individuals have been left out of the conversation about what a job should look like in their area for generations. Mm-hmm. So now there's an identity because now we need to recognize, yes, there are different identities that want the same as everybody else. So let's call them. It's just like you and I. We have different names. We're human beings, but we don't want to be grouped as they or them. We want to be known as Boogs and Twaz.
007. Mm-hmm.
You get what I'm saying? So it's these group of people that want to be named by what they are. It's just like your name. Me calling you Twaz. It's like
it's a form of recognition. It's a form of
I see you. You're here. Your
Your
voice is heard. Now let's group together and let's get the jobs. Like to your point. But I think identity politics is important.
Agreed, because 1 in 3 Black American communities are affected by pollution because they're usually, what's the word I'm looking for? They're usually in proximity to factories and chemical, processing companies and entities and businesses. So yeah, and those things can be very much deliberate, you know what I mean? So in regards to Flint, I feel like this would be a great example of the greater umbrella society that you mentioned, Twaz, to implement better policies, restructure the infrastructure. And also, yeah, I think a nice little payout beyond 600 million should be given to these people. You know what I mean? To me, that would be a great example to show, yes, we don't need to focus so much on identity, but we can actually take care of the communities that we all live in.
And focus on jobs. Like, let's say they up it to, $1 billion. Let $500 million be put into revitalizing and re-infrastructuring their infrastructure so they can get clean water.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Agreed.
Like,
But we know they're not going to get that.
So they don't just get $600,000. They don't just get $6,000, but they also get some job guarantees because the place clearly needs some revamping. You know,
Yeah,
and those are jobs that they can go to.
But we know they're not going to get that, and this is why, again, that we, unfortunately, identity is so crucial to the narrative and the stories. It's because of how we're seen or how we're not seen.
Basically, come from a place of being educated, a skill set, whether it's a trade, you went to a good school. Your probability, the likelihood of you having a gainful employment is going to be higher. And then if we look at that and then we then take it to tuition and the exorbitant cost in tuition fees in America, compared to somewhere where like I live in Canada, where we have publicly funded post-secondary institutions, and you look at America and you're looking at, okay, these people want jobs, but they're not really educated. They can't afford to. They're trying to get scholarships. And then the scholarships are torn apart by, what is it, affirmative action or certain number of, and correct me if I'm wrong, certain number of Black and brown people enter this school. And once they meet the quota, it's cut off, and then everybody else is all white. And then you have like the Legacy Act or the Legacy, whatever you guys call it, for, my grandmother went, I can go automatically, or I get a number of points. And it's just like all of these barriers are set up for, to make it even harder for an individual to obtain that good job, right? And to be in that pool of, having, the American dream, quote unquote, and to thrive. So I just think that, like, yes, jobs is an issue, environment and all of those things, but fundamentally it really starts with the education that they're receiving from kindergarten and up.
To add to that, the re-education, because a lot of the skills that, a lot of the workforce is under 30. A lot of the workforce a lot of the workforce is over 30 and over 40. These people still need jobs too. And a lot of the skills and the trades they've been educated on has been outmoded, outdated. You know what I mean? It needs to be updated.
Yeah.
So a lot of retraining.
Right. So like the guys who want to go back to coal because it's all they know, but really, realistically speaking, they need to be retrained.
Yeah, but I feel like, so what you're saying, what both of you are saying, I totally agree with in terms of shifting some of that funding maybe into re-education, developing newer industries, greener industries, those things. But I feel like as a group of people, again, I might be like the dead horse in the room that's beating my own self. Yeah, I feel like this is just scraps because it's almost 7 years later. You're telling me no one's made any attempt to change the or rehabilitate the infrastructure. There was a gentleman, I need to get this man's name, a Black gentleman who actually had a portable water filtration system, and he funded it with his own money. And he went and set that up in Flint, and then I think within a week it was vandalized. So this is why I'm saying it's just like, I feel like we as a people, we're constantly, it's like as Books was saying, we constantly have pushback no matter when and where, if we choose to pick ourselves up and, take our own initiative, we're still having so much pushback. So I honestly just feel like the 600 million is not enough. And I feel like it's just scraps being thrown to shut these people up. And then we're going to probably just go back to forgetting about it completely, which is not what we want and not what we need. Again, umbrella statement, we definitely need more education. We definitely need more opportunity. But those things I feel like we are almost always the last people to truly receive those things, unless we really, really, really make a lot of noise and push hard for it. I think a lot of times other groups even benefit before we do. I just always find that we seem to always get the short end of the stick. Whether it's funding, whether it's just, our community infrastructure, like not even Flint itself, like me coming from Brooklyn, like certain areas where I grew up, Flatbush, like all of a sudden now it is because of gentrification. Yes. And Toronto is the same thing, as we all know. It's just like, I feel like our communities are almost always forgotten. So even though we may have leadership in place. Sometimes they're just placeholders. That sounds redundant, but you know what I mean? Sometimes those leaders are just placeholders. They really have no true power, you know? So it's sad that these people in Flint have to go through this and have been going through this for this long. And I don't know what can happen or what can occur to actually help them on a much bigger scale instead of just a $6,000 per person payout. You know, I feel like that's nowhere near enough. You could take that and go buy 2 outfits and lunch and be done.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Now, was this taken to, this is like the Flint, Michigan Civil Court? Hey, yo, is this like, cause it's clearly going to take federal action. Yeah, this is clearly going to take federal action.
And this is why I'm questioning, why is it taking so long? You know what I mean? There's places in Louisiana. There's a place called, I'm actually looking at the notes right now. It is in St. James Parish in Louisiana. That area is called Cancer Alley, because so many of those Black people that live in that community come up with cancer simply because they're adjoining a chemical plant that's across the river. So in my head, I'm like, how do we solve situations like that when it is a predominantly Black community? The leadership may be predominantly Black. Like, how do we get more attention, more funding? What would it take for us to be able to say, no, we don't want this pipeline running through here. No, we don't want this factory. Because a lot of ways companies endear themselves to a community is by providing jobs, even if those jobs are killing them. You know what I mean? So, like, what kind of ways can we usher in change in regards to environment and proximity and community when it affects us as Black people specifically?
Once again, to what I was saying before, this is not just a Black rights issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an environmental justice issue. You know, it's a broader level. You know, going back to Big Tent politics. This is not just a Black problem. This is an environmental problem. You know what I mean? This isn't just injustice to the people that live on the environment. This is injustice to the actual natural environment, which may or may not recover from some of these chemicals and industrial wastes being pumped into it for profit. So, you know, once again, this is going to take federal action, federal policies. I know Joe Biden mentioned his Green Deal policy, which is going to, you know, connect jobs with fighting the greenhouse gas effect, which is causing, you know, pollution and making, you know, the water, sea levels rise. So, you know, I hate to be the person that says it's up to the government to do this. We only can make nothing, you know what I mean? But to start out, you know, it's going to have to start from the top at this point, you know, and trickle down. You know, there's going to be lots of money that's going to have to be put into it. How do you feel, just to piggyback a question back to you, how do you feel about the Green New Deal, both of you, as far as its potential effect or its goals? Is it realistic? Is it tenable?
I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with it. I'm actually Googling as we're speaking. I can be honest. Let me just see what he says. I don't know if Books is familiar with the Green Deal. Oh, the Green New Deal.
But I was going to say, in terms of environment, the people that really have been impacted by environmental changes from colonization till today is the indigenous peoples. And to this day, they are still protesting against their natural resources and their land and it being stolen from them and running pipelines to get oil through their communities and destroying their communities and doing so. We just had a protest out here last year because they wanted to build a new pipeline. And that's First Nations. And, you know, they've been going through that since the beginning of time, and they're still protesting. They're still trying to get leaders in place, and the leaders will, you know, promise not to do this, not to do that, you know, to rebuild their communities and so on and so forth. And they're still suffering from, you know, poor housing conditions, contaminated water. Their resources are being tainted. And things like that. So I get what you're saying about it's a human rights issue and it's all of our issues. But if you look at it from a historical context, the issue has been going on so long, and this conversation that we're having right now is not new. So I'm going back to my original point, like, how do we overcome? Because going to leadership and relying on federal government and local governments has proven not to work. Like, it's literally there. It's literally in black and white. Like, they've written laws to not help.
What about Obama? Well, I'm going to counter that for a second. What about Obamacare? You're saying that totally, ignores and undermines and doesn't give credit to what Obamacare has done for low income, specifically black people in the black community who are underserved and non-served with getting health care. It's been a big, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you don't have to worry about that in Canada, but here in America, just seeing how many more people have been to the doctor because of Obamacare. That was a federal mandate. It took a federal mandate somewhere from the top to get that to happen. And it has had an effect. Just even people having their Obama phones is all part of a federal mandate to get cell phones and get health care in the lives of the poor community, specifically low income. I mean, that officially, he could say it, affected mostly black people who are having a health crisis in the United States, and still are, but definitely to a lesser extent now than before Obamacare. And I can say that just by people I know who are able to get the health care they need because of Obamacare. So there is some hope for federal mandates. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to the history of black people in this country. It's been federal government that stepped in after the Civil War to in many ways protect us. I'm not saying it's been perfect, but as low-income people, what we've had to turn to a lot of times, not always successfully, has been the federal government.
Well, I think we're talking about two different things. Yes, the healthcare, Obamacare was successful. I mean, you do have the Republicans who are trying to get rid of it, so it's like an ongoing battle. But I'm more so.
But it's there. But it's still there. You know what I mean? Well, it's still there.
Right.
So
right.
Right, but that's more than it was before. It was there. You know what I mean? So it's something now they're trying to dismantle. So we can't discredit the fact that it's currently there and in effect.
Right, and I'm not. And again, that's what I'm saying. I think we're talking about two different things in terms of like the environment and natural resources and destroying it, and legislation being written to keep it destroyed versus healthcare.
Well, don't you think we are part of the natural environment? And so don't you think preserving our health though is part of the natural environment? Don't you think?
They're intertwined, but they're not quite 100% the same thing. So we're looking at the beginning stages. We're looking at the root of the tree versus what the leaves, which is people who are in need of medical care. We're looking at the root of a problem where the environment can create medical situations where people are in need. So if for example, I was reading on this new the Green New Deal, and it says he wants out of the $2 trillion of investments in green technology and green energy and cleaner environment. Biden wants to give 40% of that $2 trillion into investments that are directed to communities of color living in the toxic edge of the fossil fuel economy. I personally think this is just a classic politician pandering. And I'll be blunt, I don't think this is going to happen for us. The only time something seriously is considered is when the bigger community, and we know who those people are affected. For example, remember the crack babies and the crack era. No one cared about that. But when the opioid era kicked in, and middle America is now suffering from opioid crisis, now they want to build community centers. So what I'm saying is, when it comes to us and our communities and being able to live in healthy, clean communities, I think part of it in terms of politics, like Books, you mentioned local politicians versus the higher federal level. I do believe it's a matter of finding people who are passionate about the community and who are willing to effectively PR our causes, and part of that is using a human rights issue, to help us fight our battles at the federal level. Otherwise, I don't think they're going to see us. If it's just about us, and you were saying, oh, this black city is suffering because of these chemicals or this being leached into the water, I don't think they necessarily give it a priority. Yeah.
Are you even familiar with the George Soros, the investor, one of the richest men in the world?
Yeah, BLM's.
And he made a $220 million investment. You know what I mean? Into black rights groups. You know, and I say that it's just that like there are people and there are resources and people hiring and putting money into think tanks to fund the next era of leadership for black causes in this country. So I'm not trying to say, you know, or come across as like, we got to get help from other people, but we do. This is expensive. Making change is expensive. Organized is expensive.
It is.
Support people is expensive. You know what I mean? You have to,
and we are part of a greater community, so yeah.
Right. So and even white people with money are realizing that you know, keeping black people happy is good for business. So it's like they're not just doing it solely out of their hearts, but out of their pockets too. You know what I mean? They know they have something to gain. Happy black people is a help them and happy America. You know?
That's a good point.
You know, because we're a big part of the spending. You know, our buying power in this country is the black woman's buying power, you know, is unprecedented. You don't understand how much money the black woman has, the black female in America. How much
we would be the 7th largest nation by GDP.
Their hair alone.
Right. But black women alone, like as far as like demographics and spending, black woman as compared to income, how much of the income they spend is very high.
I was going to say,
right.
Oh my God.
Right. Exactly. Right.
I'm about to put my kids through college with this weave business.
Right. If you compare income, the percentage of income they spend, you know, and put into the economy compared to, you know, they're the
and I agree. And then same black people, we spend high, but our money doesn't pass in our communities once. In the Jewish community, it passes 14 times.
Yeah, but it only spends a few hours.
It passes 12.
Yeah. And I think that all of this is linked into why our communities are as deprived as they are, you know, because, you know, people can profit off of our communities, but they don't see actual value in our communities. And I think part of the onus of that, it does fall on us as the people who live in these communities. But I honestly do believe we need allyship outside of the community. I do believe we need to, you know, life in itself, I'm learning, is very much it's a game of chess, and being able to sell things in a way that people can, and being able to sell it right. You know, it's all PR. Because again, if it's kind of like a black man trying to run for president and he's running on a pro-black platform, that X's out a good portion of the society. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you exactly. That who's going to want to buy that? Who's going to want to buy that besides black people? And we're not a big part of, you know, we absolutely got to realize demographically, we're not a large part of the demographic of the continent of the United States. You know what I mean? Percentage-wise, we're not a majority.
Right. And I think going back to what you said earlier, Neil, about leadership, or was it you, Twaz, about leadership? I think that we as a people, like us three right here on this podcast, like we have to understand that we are leaders within our own rights too. We control, and by that I mean like we control where and how we spend our money. And I think, you know, local impact and change on a local level is so very impactful, because if I consciously choose to spend my dollar at a black-owned business, I am choosing to ensure or making my own micro contribution to the movement, or just to us as a community and as a people, to make sure that my dollar is spent building that community. And for us to just skip over and straight to leadership and look for this big shining beacon when we have our local communities are just, you know, they're not cohesive, because, you know, I'm spending my money there. Twaz is spending his money at Neiman Marcus. You're spending your money at Amazon, and we're not going to the local. We're not going to the local black supermarket.
But I'm saying even the ability though of shop owners and entrepreneurs to maybe to open shops in certain communities, that's going to take some.
Well, I know, but there are, but there.
That's going to take more than local help.
I know that, but there are
governments, some local government, right? But you know what I mean, and for local government.
And I guess my point is, in order for the government to see that, we have to make sure locally that we're starting to throw our money in that area, because it's only going to be that little local Black-owned supermarket, one in every, I don't know, state. I'm being dramatic. One in every state is only going to get recognized for more government funding if that supermarket is thriving financially, and we can control if it thrives financially by making sure we pour all our money into that little.
And all the people, and all the people we know goes to it too. That's right. Really get people know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, like just speaking locally and on a small scale will impact change over time versus what is that leader doing and why is he not doing it for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, it has to, you know, a growth of a tree starts with its roots. So, you know, you can't just, it doesn't grow down. Most trees don't. So I'll be honest, I've always said over and over and over again to those who listen to me, I do believe, you know, a lot of times you hear about Black people, we're not a monolith, which is absolutely true. No humans in this world are monoliths, but groupthink is essential, I think, for us, and groupthink amongst Black people to just kind of help us to perpetuate more, you know, safer communities, thriving communities, so that we are on the same page. So if we were a Flint and we realize that the water's not clean, the community is completely behind, you know, each other, and that can help in usher in change in a faster way versus fragmented, or, you know, it's not as unified enough to present as powerful as needed, you know, for whatever issues you might be facing. So, but gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Double Bind. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've learned that we definitely can think differently. But yeah, once again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Double Bind. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. We're talking Twaz from New York and Books from TO. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in next week for the next episode of Double Bind.